On today's video, we're going to talk about one of the easiest, simplest, and sometimes the best way to catch big bass. Hey there, outdoor YouTubers. Well, like I said earlier, today's video is about one of the simplest, easiest, best ways to catch big bass. And no suspense, just going to get right into it. What I'm talking about is using live bait. And specifically for me, I'm talking about fishing with crawlers or leeches underneath a bobber. Now, minnows are also an excellent option for catching bass. In the fall, I know a lot of guys really like to use big chub minnows for smallmouth bass. And if you're heading down to Florida looking to get a 10-pound largemouth and you're calling around to a bunch of different guides and seeing what they would recommend or what they would take you out and do, a lot of them are going to say, hey, our best chance at getting a 10-pound largemouth, we're going to be fishing with really big live shiners. So minnows are an excellent option for bass fishing too, but they're a little bit more of a hassle, right? Keeping them alive, all that sort of thing. So for this video, I'm just going to be concentrating on leeches and crawlers. Now, I know a lot of you bass fishermen out there are like, hey, wait a minute. I don't fish with crawlers and bobbers. I don't fish with leeches and bobbers. That's for walleye guys. I like to fish with artificial lures. I like to fish with crankbaits, spinner baits. I like to fish with soft plastics. And I know some of you guys are even saying they don't even allow live bait in the tournaments that I fish, so I don't care about live bait at all. But me personally, I don't really do any kind of tournament fishing, and I really just like to catch bass. Now, I am not telling you that a leech or a crawler underneath a bobber is always going to be the best option to catch bass. When bass are really aggressive and they're hitting spinnerbaits and they're hitting crankbaits, that maybe is the best option, right? Because you're fishing fast, you're covering a lot of ground, you're getting in contact with more fish, and oftentimes when the bass are aggressive like that, that method will catch you more bass. But oftentimes, the fish are going to be more neutral to negative when it comes to feeding. And that's where live bait can really pay off sometimes. Now, I know with a lot of you bass fishermen, when the fish are neutral to negative, you like to go to soft plastics. Soft plastics can be fished quite a bit slower than some of the cranks and spinner baits, and oftentimes you will catch a lot of those lethargic fish with soft plastics. But it is hard to beat the real deal, right? It is hard to beat that real live leech or that real live crawler. Now, you don't have to fish these leeches or crawlers underneath a bobber, but for a lot of the fishing I do, that seems to work a lot better, okay? Now, you could put them on a slip sinker, cast them out, let them go to the bottom, but a lot of the fishing that I'm doing, I'm fishing in 2 to 8 feet of water, and using a bobber keeps that rig off of the bottom, keeps it more snag free. A lot of the areas I'm fishing, it's kind of a muddy, murky, weedy bottom, and sometimes that bait can get kind of lost on the bottom if you just use a sinker. So for a lot of the fishing I'm doing, I am going with the bobber. Now, if I do think those bass are down 6, 8 feet below the surface, oftentimes I will use a slip bobber so that I can set that up and get that down to that depth. And if you're not too familiar with slip bobbers, I will leave a link down in the description of this video that'll bring you to several of my slip bobber videos. So if you got any questions about slip bobbers, you can check those out. So really what I'm doing is I'm just fishing very bassy areas, right? Brush piles, docks, weed beds, that sort of thing. You're casting these bobbers and leeches or bobbers and crawlers into these areas, and you're kind of just letting them sit. Now, if I'm not getting bit, I'm not letting those things sit there forever. I might cast to one part of that structure and just leave that setup sit there for, say, 30 seconds. If I'm not getting bit, I'm reeling in, and maybe I'm just moving over 6 feet to another spot on that structure, and so on until you pick that whole piece of structure apart. Because oftentimes there's going to be bass in that structure that if you were to cast a crankbait at them, they're just going to watch it swim by. Cast a spinnerbait at them, they're just going to watch it swim by. But if you cast that leech or that crawler and boom, and it sits down and it's right in front of their face and it's wiggling and it's just staying there and it's not going anywhere, eventually that bass is just like, ugh, this is just so easy. I'm just going to swim over there and I'm going to suck that in. It's just too easy. I didn't feel like chasing minnows today. I didn't feel like running around. I'm really not that hungry. But that stupid looking night crawler, it's just sitting there in my face wiggling. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to take it. And that's the idea. That's us fishermen catching more of those kind of lethargic bass. Because, you know, that leech or that crawler just sitting there, it's just like bass bacon. All right? It's no different than me or you at our house at the kitchen table. If there's like one piece of bacon sitting on the kitchen table, even if we're full, right? Even if we don't even want it, even if we just ate a bunch of bacon, if that bacon just stays on that table and we're kind of walking by and we're sitting at the table and we're doing this or that, eventually we're going to grab that piece of bacon and we're going to eat it, right? You know, that's almost like what a leech or a crawler is to a bass, right? It's like bass bacon. If it just sits there in front of them, eventually they are just going to eat it. Now, the downside to fishing with bobbers and crawlers or leeches, it is going to be a little bit slower. You're probably not going to be able to cover as much ground as you would if you were casting crankbaits or spinners around. But that doesn't mean that we're going to go out and throw the anchor down and just sit on one piece of structure and wait for the bass to come to us either. A lot of times when I'm fishing with bobbers and crawlers or leeches, I'm actually going around with an electric motor and covering the shorelines just like I would if I was casting cranks or spinners at these fish. You're going along, you're casting to likely spots just like you would with anything else, but that crawler or that leech is just hanging around just that little bit longer than some of your other presentations. Now, that doesn't mean that I never anchor. In fact, I do anchor quite a bit when I'm fishing like this. If I get near a likely spot, I will drop the anchors down and really take some time dissecting that piece of structure. But again, I'm not going to sit there all day. Maybe I stay there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, do a good job, you know, dissecting that structure with these bobbers and leeches and crawlers. And then I'm raising the anchors up and I'm moving to the next likely spot and doing the same thing. So you actually can fish somewhat aggressive even though you're using bobbers and crawlers or leeches. I know many times I'll be out fishing with my family and maybe I got some kids, the wife with me, and they just want to catch fish. They don't care what they are. So they're perfectly happy to put like a worm or a piece of crawler on, catch bluegills, perch, bass, that sort of thing. And I might be specifically targeting bass. I might be pitching crankbaits. I might be throwing some soft plastics, that sort of thing. Well, they're having fun with the bluegills. But I'll tell you, there's been many, many times where we're out fishing like that. I'm specifically targeting bass with artificial baits. They're fishing with their pieces of crawlers, content to catch bluegills, and they're catching the most bass. Or oftentimes, they're catching the biggest bass of the night. Another thing that's played out for me many times is, say me and a buddy are out fishing. My buddy's in the front of the boat. We're going along this shoreline. My buddy's maybe casting cranks or spinner baits, trying to catch some bass. And you know how it is if you're in the back of the boat, right? You know, you're getting all kind of the leftovers, right? The aggressive fish, they already bit on your buddy's baits already, so you're kind of getting the leftovers being in the back of the boat sometimes, right? So oftentimes in that situation, I'm throwing a leech and a bobber on, and I'm casting to that shoreline just like my buddy in the front of the boat was, and I will hold my own as far as catching fish, even though I'm kind of getting the leftovers that weren't aggressively hitting his artificial stuff. Now, if I'm specifically targeting bass with crawlers or leeches, there's a handful of hook options that I like to go with. Sometimes I like to go with a small live bait jig. Sometimes I'll just go with the hook. If I'm going with a leech, I'm generally going with a little bit smaller, maybe more on the lines of a size 4. If I'm going with the full crawler, I might be looking at more like a size 1 hook. And you definitely want these hooks to be sharp. I want a good strong hook that's not going to flex on the hook set. If you're out fishing like this and you're kind of open to maybe catching some bluegills if they're around, of course you might want to go with a little smaller hook too. For leeches, I hook them right behind that bigger sucker. For crawlers, I'll just take them and kind of hook them right down the middle and just kind of leave them hang like that and let them move around and wiggle and tempt those bass. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to take a quick time out with a word from my one and only sponsor, Camaro's Crawlers. Hey guys, has this ever happened to you? You're out in the backwoods, like I am today. You're fishing your favorite trout stream, and you're catching so many fish that you run out of bait. Well, that's not what happened to me today. I actually forgot to bring bait. But luckily for me, Camaro's Crawlers is now offering Bait Dash services. Bait Dash is just like DoorDash is to restaurants, but instead of bringing you food, my buddy Ronnie Camaro will deliver you all the fishing products that he has at his bait shop. Now, you guys know Ronnie Camaro, right? He only drives Camaros. He's got a summer Camaro. He's got a winter Camaro. But Ronnie does make an exception to the Camaro rule when he needs to get out into the backwoods. So luckily for us, Ronnie Camaro's got a souped up off-road motorcycle so he can get those fishing products to us even if we're off the beaten path. Because even Ronnie's Camaros can't get back to where I am today. All I had to do was call Camaro's Crawlers and place the Bait Dash order for 24 crawlers with Ronnie's pro staffer mom. Because as you guys might know, Camaro's Crawlers is actually in the basement of Ronnie's parents' house where he lives. So quite often, Ronnie's pro staffer mom will actually answer the phone. So Ronnie's pro staffer mom assured me that Ronnie would get those 24 crawlers to me within 15 minutes. I think I hear him coming right now. Buddy! Hey buddy, you got the crawler? All right. Awesome. Keep the change, huh? All right. I'll tell you what, Ronnie Camaro's Bait Dash service really came through for me today. So if you're out on the water and you forgot your hooks or you ran out of worms, be sure to call Camaro's Crawlers and give Bait Dash a try. Also, if you're looking to get your Michigan fishing license, be sure to stop by Camaro's Crawlers and Ronnie's pro staffer mom will direct you to a store that sells fishing licenses. For all your fishing needs, Camaro's Crawlers has you covered. All right, well that's just fantastic what Ronnie's got going on down at the bait shop there. Now, another thing I'd like to point out is even when some bass are pretty aggressive and they're hitting hard on your artificials, that doesn't mean that all the bass are doing that.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is, you're out fishing some structure for bass, maybe you're dock fishing, you're fishing around pontoon boats, brush pile, whatever, and you're casting your artificials. Maybe it's soft plastics, maybe it's cranks, maybe it's surface lures, whatever. And you're getting fish, right? You're catching fish, you're getting bit, it's a good day of fishing. But before you move on from that structure, okay, you're casting your artificials, you caught a few fish, you think it's time to move on. But before you move on, go ahead and cast that crawler in there or cast that leech in there and see what happens. I'm not saying that's going to work every time, but a lot of the times you will get a few more fish by doing that. Because like I say, even when the fish are aggressive, it doesn't mean all the fish are aggressive. And there might be that straggler just kind of sitting there, kind of in a neutral mode, wasn't interested in the artificial presentations you threw at them. But when that real live crawler or that real live leech sits there in front of their face, they just can't resist. And another scenario where it can really pay off with the crawlers or the leeches is when you're fishing a really busy pressured lake. And I know you guys have all been there a time or two, right? You're out there fishing, it's the end of June, it's a Saturday afternoon, and you're going down this shoreline, you're fishing docks, and you're fishing boats, and you're fishing some of the structure, and there's another boat 100 yards down the shoreline, and it looks like they just got done doing the same thing you're doing, but they're kind of ahead of you, right? They've hit all these spots before you. Well, that's another great time to pull out the live bait, see if you can pick off some of those fish that weren't interested in their artificial presentations, right? Some of these bass that are sitting underneath real obvious docks or under real obvious pontoon boats, they may have been sitting there all summer. They've maybe been caught a couple of times. They've seen every lure, they've seen every spinner bait, they've seen every soft plastic thrown at them, and they're maybe starting to turn their nose up to a lot of these presentations. And that's where throwing a real crawler or a real leech at them can really pay off. So even if it's not your primary tactic, okay, even if it's not your go-to tactic, it really pays off to grab that container of crawlers, grab that container of leeches, have one pole set up with a bobber, and have that ready for some of these situations. All right, guys. Well, I hope some of this stuff helps you put a few more fish in the boat. And, you know, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and subscribe. It's absolutely free. And also, remember to hunt fish, laugh, repeat. This is Dave Knetter from Knetter's Practical Outdoors. Hey, thanks for watching and God bless.